The following stories are from members of Hanmaum Church in South Korea. They aired on a Korean Christian TV network called C Channel and were dubbed in English.
Hello, I'm Jina Kim from Hanmaum Church in Chuncheon. My dream was to become a world-class architect. When I met the risen Christ, I began to design buildings for the Lord. I want to glorify God joyfully in this one life we have. I'd like to talk about this joy with you. I never really acted like a child even when I was a little girl. It's because my parents argued a lot, so our family was always unhappy and I didn't have anyone to depend on. I had gone to church ever since I was little, and I had watched my mom hold on to her faith even when things got rough, so God's existence was a big part of my life. My mom had given me a lot of Christian books to read ever since I was a child, and all of them were about living and working for the Lord's glory. But I always wondered how someone could give up the one life he or she has for the Lord. I wanted to try living a life like that too, if only I could. But I didn't think I could give up my dreams for the Lord. My dreams were all I had. If I gave that up, I would have nothing. Still, knowing that God was always with me gave me a lot of strength and comfort, so I would constantly pray, God, when I become successful, I promise I'll boast of your grace. I wanted to live my life meaningfully. One positive trait that God had given me was that I could focus intensely and passionately on something I put my mind on doing. But up until high school, I didn't know what it was that I really wanted to do, and I didn't know what I should live for. I didn't want to go blindly to university without a clear purpose just because everyone else did. Then I saw a show on TV where people who were downtrodden like me were being given new homes. Both the architect who had designed the house and the family now living in it looked so happy. And I thought that if I became an architect who loved what I did, I could be happy and help others be happy too. So I majored in architecture as a university student. Our first assignment was designing our own home, and I poured myself into the project while imagining the happy faces living in my new home. My project allowed me to be noticed by my professors from the start, and architecture suited me really well because once I focused on something, everything else became second priority. A degree in architecture takes 5 years, and you have to take 6-hour credit courses that you attend twice a week, 7 hours each. The remaining 5 days of the week are spent preparing for that class. It's routine to pull at least 2 all-nighters every week. There are also several open critiques each semester where we present our work before a large group of professors, students, and special guests, then listen to their evaluations. It gets insane during critique period. You have to pull 2 to 3 all-nighters in a row in the design lab, inhaling aerosol and superglue and take 5 to 10-minute naps. Meanwhile, you have to keep going over the presentation in your head because you need to present thought-out reports, diagrams, and models for the building you designed. You really experience the limits of your physical and mental capacity through all this. At my school, we had to do 4 of these critiques every semester. At school, I got to meet a professor that I came to regard as the architect whom I most respect. And during open critique, many professors and guests praised my work and I gained a lot of recognition. My ultimate goal was to win the Pritzker Prize, which is the most prestigious award in the field of architecture. No one in Korea had won this prize yet, but I thought it could be possible if I retained my first passion and kept enjoying my work. Then, in the midst of this hectic life, my grandfather suddenly passed away. I hadn't been able to see him on his birthday due to my project deadlines, and here I was now attending his funeral. I felt so hollow inside. But I didn't even have time to grieve. I had an impending deadline for a huge project. I was even working on the project at the funeral home. I didn't have any time to rest before going back to class. After I turned it in, my professor told me I had done a great job, but my feelings were a mixed bag. My stamina hit bottom, and during an all-nighter, I was taken to the ER. I was lying in a cold, unfamiliar hospital bed with an IV stuck in my arm. I hadn't even been able to call home, and I was asking myself, is this worth it? The most terrifying aspect of all this was that I could no longer enjoy the work I used to love in the same way. I asked myself whether pouring all my passion into this work was worth it. I was questioning my entire career path. All I wanted was a break, but it was impossible to have, and it was going to be like this for the rest of my life. That's when I felt that there truly was no key to my problems in this world. Only God could give me what I was looking for. Then it was summer break, and my mom invited me to a retreat at church. With a desperate heart, I set everything else aside and attended the retreat with her. After one worship service there, someone asked me if I was sure of my salvation. I began to answer by saying, "Well, I can speak in tongues," but I was told that speaking in tongues had nothing to do with salvation. Then I had nothing else to say. I suddenly remembered a Bible verse that had terrified me several years back. It was in Matthew 7. "Not everyone who says to me, 'Lord, Lord,' will enter the kingdom of heaven." Assurance of salvation could never come from yourself. As someone else was passing me by, she said, "Jesus' resurrection is a historical fact." That sentence hit me like a ton of bricks. I was shocked because I realized that I had been holding on to something very vague and invisible and thinking that was faith. But I had never doubted God's existence, nor had I ever blamed Him for anything. That's why all this time I had been imploring God to please acknowledge my faith in Him. But still, this world had been everything to me, and I was scared that God would tell me to sacrifice something for Him. I did speak of His glory, but the truth was that inside I was filled with my own. I was beginning to admit all of this to myself. Then all I could do was cry because I felt like it was so unfair. To whom had I been praying all this time? Who was the one giving me strength during hard times and leading me? In the midst of this despair, the words, "He is Lord," came into my ears. I was told that Jesus had risen so that we would no longer live for ourselves again. All this time, I had thought that faith was acknowledging His existence no matter what. But never in my life had I heard that you had to believe in Him as your Lord. At that moment, I could see that Jesus' resurrection was embedded squarely in the middle of human history. God really did exist, and I was standing in front of Him right now. All my excuses vanished, and my knees got weak. I understood Matthew 7 in an instant. Jesus was saying that He didn't know those who didn't have Him as their Lord. I came back home after the retreat and was lying in bed, but I couldn't sleep at all. I was looking back on my life and remembering all the times I had lived however I wanted. Every time things got hard, I had prayed on this bed as I cried, and He had listened to every word. And I knew this God. I had met Him. I couldn't control the excitement of meeting that God. Even during the moments I had lived as my own master, He had waited for me, endlessly knocking on the door to my heart. This was God. He was a person. It was heartbreaking. Standing before Him, I wanted to vomit out everything I had done as my own Lord. God, I'm so sorry. I dared to claim what You gave me as my own. I took Your throne and stole Your glory. I repented with all my heart and soul. When I opened my eyes the next morning, I felt a peace and joy that I had never experienced before. When I was walking on the street, I just started crying. Because I was sure that God existed and He was with me right now, all my anxieties went away and I could have true rest. The more I thought about it, the more amazing Jesus' resurrection got each and every day. I began to tell everyone I saw, "Jesus rose from the grave! Jesus rose from the grave!" Then one of my friends from middle school came to believe in Jesus as her Lord. She used to be Buddhist. It was amazing. That's how summer break ended, and that year there was a big celebration for our department's 40th anniversary. I was selected as the top student in my class and received a scholarship at the commemoration. God let me experience what happened if I sought His kingdom and His righteousness first. Though I was extremely busy with schoolwork, I began the unthinkable feat of going to Chuncheon for church. I spent nearly all my time going to church, writing testimonies, and sharing the gospel. My GPA suffered heavily, but I didn't care. Then one day during worship service, the pastor drew a circle on the chalkboard and wrote "me" at the center. Then he drew lines extending from the circle that stood for possessions, time, relationships, job, skills, and family. He explained that even if you broke every one of these branches off yourself, you would still be left with yourself in the center because you were the Lord. He said Jesus being Lord wasn't supposed to be like this. Then he erased the word "me" in the circle and replaced it with Lord. It was amazing. The moment the center of your heart changed from yourself to the Lord, everything belonged to the Lord. Then you were able to do everything for the Lord, even when you ate and drank. I realized that by being a lazy and uncommitted student, I had been casting a shadow over the glory of God, because He was the one who had given me my student status. The thing was that I had felt like studying architecture was a stumbling block for me. Plus, it was too hard and I wanted to quit. So then I asked God, does it matter what profession I have as long as I'm meeting people to share the gospel? Athletes can glorify you by winning. Teachers can share the gospel with students. Musicians can write praise songs. What can architects do? Then God reminded me of a passage in Romans 1. It said that His eternal power and divine nature have been clearly perceived in the things that have been made. I was thinking about this when I realized that, through architecture, people could experience God's natural creations in a new way and think about Him too. In order to do well in architecture, I just needed to carefully study God's creations. Architecture would benefit people when it most closely resembled the things God had made. God inspired me to think about how, just like when our souls get sick when they aren't close to Him, our bodies do the same. A little while later, I had to do a project where I designed and presented plans for my own architectural firm, and when I explained my company philosophy according to what God had let me realize, I won first place. In these ways, I did my best as an architecture student and joyfully studied for the Lord. Then it was time for my final critique, and I believed I would get through it if God helped me. As I prayed, I told Him, God, I really studied for you this semester. I realized that how God saw me was more important than the respect of others. Studying for myself had been unfulfilling and anxiety-inducing, but when I studied for the Lord, He accepted my intentions no matter what the results were. This made me so happy that I was moved to tears. I was the last presenter at the critique. I thought I had completely messed up my presentation and was quietly waiting for my evaluation. But my professor scolded me for my lack of confidence. Then he said he would give me an A+ and that he was jealous of my talent. He also told me that day that Louis Kahn, the most prominent architect in the recent past, had nothing more to learn from anyone by his 20s. A guest architect who was there to critique us praised every aspect of my work and said it was truly amazing. I was taken aback by everything that had happened that day, but when I heard all those things, I didn't feel burdened or arrogant like I used to. I was so thankful that God was with me, and I acknowledged with my entire being that God was the one who deserved the glory. I received over $7,000 in scholarships that semester from both within and outside school. I heard that the same professor continued to praise my work to his other students in the following year. As a result, a lot of students came to talk to me, and I joyfully shared the risen Christ with them. Then came my senior year, and I was hard at work finishing my graduation project. Your graduation project is the culmination of 5 years in the architecture department. All your classmates, professors, family, and friends are invited to the exhibit. It's a very meaningful occasion for an architecture student. But 2 weeks before finals and the deadline, I hurt my knee in a bad accident and had to have surgery on it. It was unexpected and shocking, but I told myself that I'd recover soon. After surgery, I worked very hard on rehabilitation. But while the rest of the patients in the ward were starting to walk, I was in terrible pain every time I tried. The pain was so bad that I was screaming and crying. A month later, the doctor told me that I was unlucky. I had to have knee surgery again. Lying on the operating table, I felt so unlucky and I was scared too. But at that moment, thoughts of the resurrection took over. I was so grateful that there was a sign, an unshakable proof that Jesus was with me. I had to constantly move my knee after surgery because the joint would stiffen otherwise, so even as I slept, a machine was moving it for me. I was completely weak as I lay in bed. I listened to my favorite sermons of my pastor many times a day. If the Almighty God had come and gone from this earth, do you believe that he would have left a sure proof for all mankind? It was God who died for me. He's the one who came into me as my Lord and Master. So even if I'm thrown into turmoil, if I don't let go of him in my heart, I'll bounce right back. I said amen to these very words. As I watched this video sermon during my difficult rehabilitation, I thought about the faith of Jesus and the love of my predecessors in faith, just how in love they had been, that they had willfully embraced pain and suffering. My heart was rekindled thinking about it. Things were getting harder for me, but I was actually becoming more joyful. And when my stamina hit rock bottom, God told me that he had allowed everything to happen and that he had enabled me to get through it. The fact that Jesus was my Lord made the circumstances fade into the background, and the prayers of the church community allowed me to have a speedy recovery. I spent 2 or 3 months in the hospital before summer break ended, and I had 10 days left before the graduation exhibit. I thought my church members would tell me that I shouldn't worry about anything other than taking it easy. But instead, they told me that even if it seemed impossible for me, I could do my graduation exhibit and get a job if I fixed my gaze on Jesus. When I heard that, it sounded like the voice of God. That's how I turned from a desire to quit and gained newfound strength to start on my graduation project. The very next day, I began making a model in my hospital room, and I prayed, God, thank you for letting this be a graduation project where all I can remember of it will be your grace. After being discharged, I worked on it all night long at school, and as a result, my leg would swell up badly. It looked terrible, but I wept and prayed. God, if this project were mine, I would give up right now, but it belongs to you, so I can't quit just because I want to. I feel awful both physically and mentally. Please give me strength. I was discharged 5 days before the exhibit, and miraculously I finished everything before it opened. I can still remember the astonished looks on my friends' and professors' faces as they exclaimed, "When did you manage to do this?" My closest friend from my department wrote me a note that said, I watched you not give up, even during such a difficult period, and I really felt that the power of faith is higher and deeper than the skies and the seas. After experiencing God's help in such a way, I didn't give up on any of the things I had fallen behind on. One by one, I was able to take care of them all. It was late, but I got my portfolio together and did 4 projects in a month. Then I sent them off to architecture contests across the country and placed in all of them. My graduation project was recommended by my professor to take part in a national graduation exhibit. There, my work was selected as one of 6 top projects for a final exhibition. If it had been up to me, I would have given up on my graduation project, but God let me solely rely on him, and he showed me that he did everything when I obeyed him. The Lord's power couldn't be overcome by the world. I thought that I would have to give up on everything if Jesus became my Lord, but the truth was that God had wanted to give me everything, not only life, but all things abundantly. God had created me for his glory, and he was joyful when I gave him back that glory through everything he gave me. Currently, where I work, I am still pulling all-nighters and working overtime, but I do it all for the Lord. I also continue to share the gospel with my coworkers. Now, whether I eat, drink, or do anything else, I live for the glory of the Lord. I give all the glory to Jesus, who is the Lord of my life and lives at this very moment. Thank you.
If you'd like to see more stories about how the gospel changed lives, visit us at facebook.com/HMUOnlyJesus or Google us at HMU Only Jesus.